privilege for me to be here. I've been a lot of places in the world, but never to Waco. So here I am, glad to be here. Worship leadership is a huge issue, no matter who you are, what kind of style your preference is, and we'll talk about some general things today to hopefully apply and hopefully a little convicting for all of us along the way. And since this is God's and spiritual business, I'd like for us to begin with prayer. If we could do that, please. Father, we are truly in awe of being able to be worshipers of the one holy, great, almighty God.
Lord.
And we have the privilege as people who lead worship to guide people into your presence, to see you, to respond, to be convicted by you, to change, to start again. Pray that you would guide us in our brief time of discussion today, that it would be helpful for how we do ministry together. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. This room's a little awkward in terms of I have to run over here and do the computer and run over here to talk, and I don't have a clicker, so we'll just do it. It's okay. Welcome. One of the, you see a little bit about my background, at least what I'm doing now. I'm one of those people that came to church music reluctantly. I started out I grew up a good Baptist boy, and I didn't want to be one of those church music types because music was terrible in my church, and it was good in my school, and so I wasn't going to be one of those church musicians because it was bad there, it was good over here. And so I raced through my graduate program, and I was going to be a college music professor, and that's what I did for 4 years in my 20s, and then I got hijacked off into a church and spent most of my life doing exactly what I said I wasn't going to do. So be careful what you say you're not going to do, because that may be what you end up doing, right? I see some nodding heads. And I thought I would then stay and die in the church, and then ended up 11 years after a search, being the person they chose to start the Fred Bach Institute, which is part of the Brehm Center for Worship Theology Arts at Fuller Seminary in California. And it's a unique thing that we do because we're a bit of a think tank where we, along with the theology, psychology, intercultural studies students, talk about how we integrate the arts with that. And so we have the Brehm Center that has different arts represented, visual arts and so forth, and my role is on the musical arts side of things. So today I'd like to talk about some things that I think are helpful but not often talked about when it comes to worship leadership. And I'll tell you one thing that drives me are some things that I read in a book a few years ago. It's a George Barna book called Revolution. Does anybody of you know this book? And you know what Barna does, right? He goes out and surveys people, and in a chapter in the book Revolution, he listed some of his statements about worship and people coming out of, these are people coming out of church now. I still can't believe it. They're coming out of church, and this is the kind of things they said. They said that attendance at worship service, by their own admission, generally the only time they think about worshiping God. So how long are they worshiping God? They would probably say a half hour out of the hour, 15-minute service or whatever. And they're saying that's the only time they think about worshiping God. There's something wrong with that statement, right? Another statement. 8 out of 10 believers do not feel they've entered into the presence of God or experienced a connection with Him during a worship service in the past year. These are people being polled coming out of church. 8 out of 10 say they never connected with God in the last year in a worship service. Now that's something wrong with that, right? But that is in fact what people are saying. And then, one more statement. Only 1 out of every 4 church believers says that when they worship God, they expect Him to be the primary beneficiary of their worship. Most people said they expect to get the most from the experience. So, here, this just drives me to do what I do, and I work a lot with 20s and 30-year-olds who are headed for worship ministry, right? And I work with pastors, and I work with future pastors, and I say, this is not what we want our churches to reflect, except the polls say that is exactly what's happening. And what has come to my attention is that I don't think our worshipers know why they're there. That's one part of the problem. I don't think they know why they're there. And I don't think we've done a good job on our end to tell them and help them understand why they're there. I view our role partly as educators, not just worship leaders. We ought to take advantage of lunches, of informal conversations, of being on our knees in front of a 7-year-old and talking about it, helping an 80-year-old who thought worship was one thing to kind of find another place to think about how to worship God. And I wish this session we could stop and talk about all the ways we could educate people about knowing why they're there. And one of the things, and I'll just say one thing, is that if people could only understand that the word worship is a verb, it meant they're going to do something. And verbs have objects, right? Verbs have objects of their action. And in the case of worship, that audience, that action should be toward an object, and it should be a vertical object. God should be the attention of our worship. And I think, as these things say, a lot of people think they're supposed to get something out of it, when in fact they're supposed to give something out of it, not get something out of it. So we have a problem of people in our congregation knowing why they're there, number one. Number two, I think we, worship leaders, we're guilty of not assisting them to help them do what they're there to do, even if they knew what they were there to do. I had a pastor who came to me not too long ago, actually. He was referred to me, a little consultation about his worship ministry, and he sat in my office, and his first word, he slumped into his chair and says, I'm from here's exactly the word, typically troubled Presbyterian church. You can put your denomination in there, but and so we started talking about things, and one of the things he concluded, he said, I've got right-hearted leaders, we've transitioned from hymnals to screens, we've got a band, we've got a choir too, but I thought he'd done a good job transitioning. And then he said, he wrote something in notes. He looked up, and I said, what did you write down? He said, I think I've got some great leaders who are so busy jamming on the platform, they don't even know there's a congregation there. So I think sometimes it's not just those congregation people don't know why they're there, it's the people who are leading don't understand why they're there. And that should make us as leaders, platform people, say, do we know why we're there? Do we know we're here to do whatever it takes to facilitate the person who's coming so that God, the audience, receives something, not just the people who are there. So I start from this standpoint. If I'm troubled by this poll, I'm troubled by people not knowing why they're coming. I'm troubled by leaders not always knowing why they're there to lead those people as well. So from that background, I want to go to our outline. And my friend Bruce Benedict is here. Bruce, you want to wave and acknowledge the fact that we know each other? Okay. I just wanted to admit that. He's at Hope College in Holland, Michigan. And, the competitors over there at Calvin, right? They're in another town not too far away. But they're good friends. But I was intrigued by this gathering that happened at the Calvin worship group. They pull in some people from time to time to talk about different topics and things. And I've been privileged to be a part of that from time to time, as has Bruce. And they, a few years, pulled together people who said they've got a common problem they're facing. And these were people from Catholic to Baptist denominational worship leaders. And they said, we're all experiencing something very common. And the common thing was, it used to feel like it's okay to just be a good musician to be considered an adequately prepared worship leader. You're either a good guitar player, you're a good choir director, you play the piano, you're an organist, you're a singer. That's the person who should be qualified to be a worship leader. And they said, but something's not feeling right about that. Now, how many of you are musicians like I am? Okay, so this is a little bit of an indictment on us, right? We're saying it used to be okay just to be good at our musical craft. And then they're saying, not that good anymore. There's something more than that. And so they ended up after 48 hours of gathering and talking about what are the things that are adequately preparation elements for those who lead worship in the 21st century. And they came up with 6 things, and I have them there on your outline. Now, we can't possibly talk in depth about this. In fact, this summer I'm preparing to do a class at Fuller in the fall online, and using these 6 things. So right now, it's good for me to talk about these a little bit, but I'm doing like a couple hours of lectures on each of these topics. So we've got an hour or less now to talk about. So I'm going to just blast through some I won't talk much about, but I'll hit others a little more. So I just want to talk through some of these things. And the first thing is theologically. And my thought is, how deeply or completely do we worship theologically? And one of the things I want to say is, you look at the statements of faith that I had that you just copied for us. One of the things I've done in this process of digging into these points is think, you know, if we, most of us come to church, we join a church, we look at a statement of faith, and we sign something, right? How many of you have done that? You've signed something, you joined a church, right? Okay. So I gathered a half a dozen statements of faith, and I looked for common elements. And so I gathered them on these pages and had them for you. You know, there's certain obvious things, the Word of God, the Trinity, those kinds of things. Let me just say something about the Trinity. I've decided that most churches do not worship in a full Trinitarian manner. There are churches who are, Jesus seems to win, by the way. but there are churches that are all about the majesty of God, His attributes, and Jesus, but we're a little afraid of the Spirit, right? And then there are some churches that are Spirit and Jesus, but never say anything about immortal, invisible, God only wise. You know what I mean? So I've decided that churches are in some ways kind of binitarian or binitarian rather than Trinitarian when it comes to worshiping with a full theology. So what is your song list like when it comes to the breadth of your theology? The other thing I'll just mention is, another thing I've decided, you know, we have these in some churches they're ordinances, in some they're sacraments, baptism and communion, right? Usually, generally a part of all churches. But you know, where were the last baptism songs and baptism prayers that you used? My sense is that most churches, and probably the more evangelical you get, the more baptism is kind of thrown in there as something you got to do in a service. I grew up poorly formed when it came to communion, because when I heard on Saturday my dad say we're having communion tomorrow, that was a bad word to me. That meant church was going to be longer because we just added communion. You know what I mean? Some of you have the same experience. Maybe some of you are still doing that. And I determined when I got pulled into church, I wasn't going to treat it that way. Here's baptism. One of the things we're showing our strong commitment to our faith. And what do? We dunk them or sprinkle them as fast as we can so we get on with the rest of the church. You know, but I think worship ministry ought to just stop, pause, and say, this is a big part of our theology, something we believe. We, us in this room, ought to be the people making a difference and saying we need to spend a little time around that. If you write music, write a song about the cleansing of the water. It's hard to find baptism songs, frankly. We need to be looking for them, creating them a little more. I want to say so much more. But I leave you this list and say, look at your statement of faith and say, we believe this in our church, and how much of your worship is being lost on some of those points. That make any sense to you? I can't tell. Nobody's nodding their head. They're all Baptists. No, anyway. But, you know, I just know that I'm driven by the fact that and one of the other points of these 6 is formation. If we're not doing a complete job with our theology, then we're not forming our congregations well in terms of worship. Oh, sorry, I'm preaching. But I'm not sorry. Hey, how many of you have ever seen one of these? Oh, let me ask it this way. How many of you have never seen one of these? It's not a board game. You can't win or lose. And Bruce, you're doing a session, right, on, what's it called? Something about church year calendar?
Yeah, celebrating the church year with contemporary worship.
With contemporary worship. So I encourage you to look at this. And I've got a couple of these, I'll pass them around. In fact, if anybody wants to steal these, you may, because I've got a couple more for redoing this class on Friday. But take a look at this. And I just suggest that this would be a way to help us think more theologically completely in our worship. I have a former student from Fuller. I had lunch with him 2 weeks ago, and he's now at a church actually in North Dallas. And he comes from a Baptist background, and he said to me, he said, Ed, in his Texas accent, Ed, I'm having fun with the lectionary. And I said, wait a second. I just heard this Baptist guy say he's having fun with the lectionary. But the lectionary is one of those great resources that will help us talk about issues in the Old Testament, New Testament, theological issues, historical issues, future eschatological issues. You know, those will all come if we pay attention to the lectionary and look at some of those readings. I wish I could talk more about that. But I have a big one of these calendars on my wall in my office. And it's really helpful to take a look at where are we in the church year. I ran into, when I first went to Fuller, ran into a professor who's so fed up with his church. And I said, why don't you just go to another church? And he said, well, I can't leave the church because the church year calendar is a part of our worship. And it tells me when I'm supposed to rejoice. It tells me when I'm supposed to get my sackcloth and ashes on. It tells me when I'm anticipating. It reminds me of the mission of God. You know, it's all contained through this kind of a resource that I think would help us worship more completely theologically. One of the things that's been a serious part of my life, and I offer some free gifts here to you, by the way, today, is here we are in the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, and there is a huge theological issues that came that we've all benefited from. And my Catholic friends will say we benefited from those issues as well in our church. And so what I did about a year and a half ago, I started on a mission for our publishing entity to create a lot of resources for this year. And I didn't want them to be tied completely to the word Reformation. But some of you are acquainted with the 5 solas. Are you acquainted with those? You know, some churches, that's their statement of faith. You know, it's Christ alone, faith alone, Scripture alone, those kind of things. So we developed a lot of resources for this year to try to help some churches worship more completely theologically around these issues. So if you want to look afterwards, there's some of these you can take, some you can't. All these CDs up here you may take. Anything that's here. So we've got a card, so we got some issues, some resources for adult choir. I'll be leading one of the reading sessions with that book. And we've got a piano book, organ book, kids, 5 songs for kids, a children's story book for devotional, 5 solas. There's a curriculum book to go with the 5 kids pieces. By the way, Pepper got so excited, they said nobody else is doing anything for kids for Reformation. And so they sent out 14,000 cards like this that just had the kids stuff on it. And, it dawned on me, I think we're missing our children when it comes to worship education and theological education. And one of the pieces, the kids pieces, I talked to one of the directors and said, thank you. You had the word incarnate in there. I could explain that to the kids. All the kids' music I see doesn't mention any 3-syllable words, you know? No theological terms. I could teach theology. So we tried to create this to expand the theological approach for adults and so forth. By the way, if you look on our website, you will see that with the adult choral book, we also have some free responsive readings that I had a Lutheran friend of mine, Lutheran theologian, create some responsive readings, which you can download for free and use them any way you like. And I wish I could show you the children's curriculum book because it's got some readings in it too. But it's sold out. I didn't print too many, and it's sold out. So we just went into reprint on that. And but it's got some great things at kid level. Let kids lead our worship and our theology as well. So So please feel free, any CD or these cards up here afterwards you can take. So, that's my little thing on theology. Formation, the next one. Are you making worship choices knowing that you're forming the people you serve? I am convinced that most worship planning does not allow for formation over the long. Formation does not take place this Sunday. Formation takes place this Sunday, the next Sunday, and the next 5 years of Sundays. But we need to, and I tell my students, you will not have an impact, this may be overstatement, but I don't think they'll have a real impact in church unless they stay in one place for at least 5 years. I said my goal for all of you is to stay at least 5 years somewhere. Because I think it takes 2 years for people to trust you, maybe 3 years, depending on what you're like, you know? And then you can start to make some difference in what's going on in the church. You've got a pastor to work with, you know, there's a lot of factors. But I think that we make 4 worship decisions. We make them for now, we make them for this week. And we need to be thinking about them for 3 years from now. And this is where the lectionary will help. You've got an ABC year, you've got 3 years of scriptures where you could pick and choose and ground your people. And don't go after the popular thing that makes people raise their hands this Sunday. Go after putting a song in their heart that makes them understand when things are bad at 3 in the morning. You know, that God will be faithful. You know, make choices like that for worship ministries, because we are forming people. Whether we're forming them well or deforming them becomes the issue. And I already alluded to the fact that we are sometimes, you know, binitarian rather than trinitarian. Let people be formed by the whole of who God is, not just a part. And then one other thing I wanted to say about this is, you know, I was fascinated. You know, Willow Creek's had such an impact on people, and I've been impacted by how they function as a ministry. Was very helpful to me from a planning standpoint. I did not agree with the seeker model because it's not a worship model, it's an outreach model. And if you want to discuss that later with me, that's fine. But you know what they did? They decided, well, something's wrong with the ministry, we need to kind of do, they did a big study. And because they're very entrepreneurial, they actually printed a book about their study, which is Revealed. And what they ended up saying in there is, you know, through our ministry, we're doing this, these are good things, but we're not making disciples. That's what they said. It was an honest input. And they changed a lot of things over the last 5 years because they looked at themselves internally. Look at yourself and your church internally. Are you forming people to be disciples of Christ, or just coming to church and doing good things? So we have to be careful about some of those things. And then formationally, I already mentioned, you know, let's pay attention to these things that we say are serious things about our faith. I'm going to run on. Cultural. You know, I think when we talk about the word culture, sometimes the first thing that comes up is pop culture. What's going on in society right now? And that is very much a part of culture that we should be aware of. Somebody a few years ago when I was on the church staff, somebody came in as a consultant, and he did something that was fascinating to me. He brought a newspaper and he ripped it up in sections, and he handed little scraps of news to everybody on the staff. He said, okay, you've got 5 minutes, and then you're supposed to get up and relate something you see in the news to something happening in the church. And we were going to do like a little 2-minute speech. Well, that was a lot of pressure. But, you know, I've done that with my students, and I said, okay, here's a song, Cornerstone, you know, da-da-da-da-da-da, you know the song, right? So here's the news. How are you going to introduce Cornerstone based on the news that happened yesterday in our world? And fascinating to think about that. I think we need to pay attention as worship leaders to what's happening in our current contemporary culture. We need to bring that. How do we bring that? How do we bring God into today's culture? But my question is, can you identify different kinds of cultures? Because I think we need to think about not only what's happening today, but what's the culture in the community on which my church is planted. A lot of churches have ignored the fact that the community around their church, their culture has changed, and the church is not. There's something wrong with that picture. We're going to really be attentive to cultural issues. I know some churches that will not sing in other languages, even though there are those languages in the blocks right around their church. There's also age culture, generational culture. How do we acknowledge the fact we have 7-year-olds and 70-year-olds here? Are those people present in our worship leadership? That's our church culture. You know, if you're Presbyterian, that's a culture. You know, if you're Baptist, that has a culture to it. There's so many cultures that affect our worship, and I wish I could say more about that, but I'm not going to say too much. Generational culture, where your church is located geographically, culture, and pay attention to all those things. Pastoral. Where and how do you have contact with the people you lead off of the platform? I'll tell you what disturbs me, and I see a lot in churches, and I get to go consult with a lot of church ministries, sit in on their worship service, and I see the worship leaders come in from the side, on the back, right? It's not a sin, but that's where they come in, and they go back that way, and they're never out with the people. They leave the platform, they come and go from the platform. And maybe you're looking at yourself right now and say, that's what I do. You know, but how are you going to lead the people if you don't know the people? And I used to make it a practice to start at the back of the auditorium, and I was in for 22 years before I came forward in a church which is in the top 100 largest churches in the country, and it was a big place. But I tried to make it a point from time to time, not every week because of things going on, but to start at the back of the auditorium before a service and make my way down and talk to people. And sometimes I'd have to quit and run up to the platform to lead, you know. And then after the service, I always came off the platform and made myself available for prayer. And those are important conversations. We used to do, there's a longer story too, but a formative story, where we from certain Sundays would bring out portable prayer benches, kneeling benches. And we were a non-denominational church, not a church. But we would spend 15 minutes or so of our worship time inviting people to come and pray. We'd have ministry leaders and so forth there. First time we tried that, I asked the pastor for permission. He said, oh, nobody's going to come and do that. Everybody will watch them coming up here. There's thousands of people here. What's wrong with them? Why are they going for prayer? You know, this is a community, it's upper middle class. You know, everybody's dressed nicely. They're not going to go up there and pray. You know what happened? Everybody lined up to pray. People have needs. But if you, and one of the pastors that I asked to stand by on prayer bench said, oh, I'll do that one time. Well, I'll do that one time. After we did it, he said, I'll do that anytime you do it. He said, why? Because it got me in touch with the people. I heard stories of people, they look really nice, but their kids are on drugs. They look really nice, but one of them got a serious doctor's appointment. They look, you know, you heard these stories, and sometimes I would have somebody else lead the worship so I could go down and be one of those people. And I'll tell you, that makes a difference in the song you're going to choose next week when you know those people are there. I'm convinced that most people, more than half the people, do not show up at our worship ready to stand and clap. They've had a bad week, they've got all kinds of problems, and they're not ready to come. They're more ready to get on their knees and be quiet than they are to stand and clap. And what do? We say, come on, everybody. I'm not sure we're being very sensitive to what the people, but if we don't know them, if we don't see them, we don't talk to them, we don't hear them. And our pastor had a great point. He said, you know, you are a pastor to the person who's right in front of you. If it's a 7-year-old, get down on your knees, you're a pastor to children. I don't care what your job title is. You know, that person's 70, you're a pastor to senior adults at that moment. Listen to that person. Pray with that person. Talk to that person. Be a pastor to that person. I think it would be indicting if we ask ourselves here in this room, when was the last time we went to a hospital and visited somebody? That's worship ministry, friends. And you know, you've probably all done that at some point in time, and you know you go to give, right? You go to be a pastor, and you leave usually more, you've gotten something more than you gave. Now sometimes it's very hard, very sorrowful to go make those visits. It's tough. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a room, I did not want to go in there, and I say, God, I've got a degree in music, what am I doing here? You know, and yet that was the right place for me, the worship leader, to be at that moment. That was the pastoral choice. And when we think of being ourselves as pastors, by the way, I encourage you to read a book. A friend of Bruce of mine, Zach Hicks, wrote a book. I saw it down called The Worship Pastor. I wrote a little blurb at the beginning for him. It's a wonderful book. It's a wonderful book. And when he was planning it, he showed me the chapter titles, and one of them was The Worship Leader as Mortician. I said, Zach, as a mortician? I said, yeah, part of our worship role as pastors is prepare people for death. I never thought about that. And yet that's a sobering, wonderful thing that we pastorally can do, isn't it? To prepare people, to put a prayer, put a song, put a posture in the heart of that person who's facing eternity. Yes, ma'am.
What did you say the name of the book again, please?
The Worship Pastor.
Worship Pastor?
Yeah, Worship Pastor. Easy read, small book.
Thank you.
Yeah, Zach Hicks.
Will be your notes, your ass off.
Yeah, he's going to be here at the conference next year. Right. So, and he's got a wonderful heart. I'll just tell you one quick thing about my story. Again, I told you, I was a musician. So, I got my doctorate degree when I was 25 and I taught, and then I ended up in this church after I told God no, so yeah, well, I can try it. So I found myself in a large church staff, probably 15 pastors. We were sitting around on one of those day-long retreats, and sometimes we dread those, don't we? Sometimes they're good. So we had one of those team-building things. We were sitting in a circle, and everybody's supposed to say something they affirm or see in the person to their left and going around the circle. We're coming around, and Charles Smith was the CE pastor. He was on my right. I just knew what Charles could say. Yeah, music program's going great, it's growing, so forth. So he came around the circle, and Charles looked at me and he said, I see in you a pastoral heart. And everything inside of me screamed, no, I'm not a pastor. That's what I'm trying not to be, And yet, that was a real watershed moment for me to say, what if he's right? How do I do that and still be a musician who believes in good quality? Well, it changed my view of what I was like as a musician. It changed my choices. It meant I had to choose some music that was probably lesser, quality than my training told me I should choose. You know what I mean? You've all experienced that, right? But sometimes we make those choices out of pastoral choices. Those are pastoral choices that we make because they lead and guide the sheep that we're serving. Talking real fast, sorry. Yeah, I already mentioned this. Examine where you go on your day of worship. Do you know the person in the back row? That was always my little challenge to myself, Do I know the person in the back row? It's easy to know the people who come all the way down, especially if you're Baptist, right? I grew up Baptist. I know nobody sits in the front two rows, but my challenge as a worship leader: do I know the people in the back row? Because I don't want them to hide. I want them to be a part. I want to know them. I want to be able to make choices in my worship leadership based on knowing that person. The L word. Sometimes I just read a book that said liturgy is the four-letter word. And again, the more toward the evangelical side of things we are, the less we like to even address what this term means. At the same time, we all have a liturgy, right? Again, growing up Baptist, I knew exactly what verse of the hymn we were going to skip, right? We always skip the third verse. I knew where we were going to pray. I knew we were going to stand. I knew the whole thing. And yet, my Baptist friends would go over to the Catholic church and say, oh, those people, they just stand and kneel. I don't know what they're doing, Well, those Catholics come over to the Baptist church and they don't know what we're doing either. But we've all got a liturgy. Here's my little admonition to you, though, about worship leadership and liturgy, no matter where you are, is that liturgy is meant to guide us somewhere. It's meant, I think a lot of our worship services ends up, we run in place. We're on the treadmill, and we do some things, and we get off, and we're not in a place differently than where we started. But a liturgy, or a choice of our worship planning, should guide us. It should form us. All these six things really do overlap. A good liturgy will help form us. It will have good theology and so forth. It will be pastoral. So when you think of liturgy, think of it as a way to tell a story, to go from one place to another. And here's one of the things I say to my students: you cannot do this by picking any 4 songs. Any 4 songs does not equal worship, because it just means you're going to run in place. It's got to be 4 thoughtful songs that lead me from one place to another. And it probably will not be song, 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 song. It will probably be song, prayer, scripture, song, song, kneel, song. You know, see what I mean? But a liturgy means that we've got to have a plan. And I'll tell you what I think the 2 missing elements that I see in churches are lack of creativity and a worship planning process that allows for creativity to happen. I'll say it again. Lack of creativity and a worship planning process that doesn't allow for creativity to happen. And I've just talked about a couple things on this in one of the handouts to help you. I just want to say that, do you know what the 4-fold pattern of liturgy is? It's kind of the standard historical form where people gather, right? They hear the word, they respond to the word, you know, and so there's this pattern. You know, you can do that pattern in any denominational worship style context. You can do that with a band of 20-year-olds. You can have a logical progression. I just threw some others up here that I know. You can take Psalm 100 and make a logical liturgy out of that. You know, where Psalm 100 says they gather outside the courts, and you go through the gates, right? And where do you end up? You end up at the Holy of Holies. So, you know, I just have this vision of the people of Israel, just you know, they're coming through the desert, and they know, and they're all gathered, and they go through the gates, and it gradually becomes a little more focused, doesn't it? So it's like a funnel approach to worship planning, where we all come, but then we end up at some place together. Psalm 100. Isaiah 6, you know, I love this one, where the vision of Isaiah, it really is a four-fold pattern of its own, where people, the vision of Isaiah, it sees God high and lifted up. You know, there's the holiness of God. There's the attributes of God. And then the second part is, so I see God, so then I look in the mirror of who I am based on who I just said God was, and it leads me to woe is me, for I'm unclean, right? So it leads us to a time of confession. And let me just say, I think confession is one of the most missing elements of evangelical worship. When we worship, we zip through confession so we can be happy again, right? When sometimes we need to stay in sadness. The world is not a happy place. And we are not always happy people. We should come from time to time. I have another premise. This is a whole other lecture. But you know that the Hebrew and the Greek words that are translated into English as worship, the primary words, are words of posture. Posture. And you know what that posture is? It's on your knees posture. And when was the last time we were on our knees as a people in our worship? I believe, and I will just tell you that years ago, my wife and I got over some of my issues in life, and you know, we need to pray together every day before I got the door. This has become a decade's pattern for us. We've been married 46 years now, and but you know, I discovered for me, it needs to be on my knees in the morning before I go out the door to work. Not just pray and stand up and hold your hand, or whatever, but it's got to be on my knees. That's for me a posture. And I cannot as a worship leader go to my people and be on my knees on the platform when everybody's watching. If I'm not on my knees doing my biblical worship, my Greek Hebrew posture, if I'm not doing that privately, then I dare not go out there and do that publicly, right? And maybe you notice, I by habit begin all my classes on my knees for prayer, which I did today. I didn't even think this may be unusual for these people, because it's usual for me now. But that's a formational thing of 25 years for me, probably. But you know, that's a reminder every time. I cannot be full of myself if I'm on my knees. It's just harder to be too full of who I am. It's a great reminder to have my head down. Sometimes it's tears in the dirt. God, and that our people need that as well. But we, the leaders, need to be ahead of the people as much as we can, right? The sheep have nothing to follow if we're not in front of them. So I would say model this, as a part of your liturgical thing. And I bring Isaiah to this. So confession, and then what's next in Isaiah 6 is God speaks, right? And God asks a question. Who's going to go for me? That's a question. And then the last part of that is response. Here I am, send me. Right? So we have see God, we see ourselves, we listen to God, and we respond to God. I could plan liturgical services in any style for 20 years based on that plan that would make sense liturgically. You follow what I'm saying? It would take you from place to place to place, and it's important because it means we see God first, right? Sometimes I have my students do a little exercise of looking for songs in the worship that are speaking to God, not about God. God is good, God is great. No, they speak to God, say, you are. And they come back surprised how often they go through a whole worship service and the worship service said nothing to God. Said a lot of things about God, Jesus, but did not talk to God. Well, Isaiah 6 will not allow you to not look and see who God is and address that fact. And then this act pattern, adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. Right? Again, see God, confess, thank God, and ask God. That's a liturgical pattern that can be used in any style and form. I hope some of that's a little helpful to help you walk from place to place rather than just running in place. And that's what I put here. Be in a different place. Oh, I remember one time coming to a congregation, and again, this is when they trusted me, right? So my first words on a Sunday morning were, I wish I could send you all out of here and then come back in. And I said, I'm not going to do that. Again, there's a lot of people. Everybody, he could have sent us out. Why would he send us out? And then I said exactly this because I want you to come in knowing what you're going to do, and I want you to leave here in a different place than you came in today. Don't be sitting here to just take in and absorb it and be happy with where you are. But we're going to challenge you today to get up and move and go out. Then creative elements. And this is another sheet that I gave you. You see it? It's got like check marks and check things down the side, the left side. In order to think liturgically, as I said, I think we have a problem with lack of creativity and a worship planning process that allows for the creativity to happen. And I can't talk more about that, I'm sorry. But what I will say is, what I think is a great exercise you could all do that would help you think formationally, pastorally, liturgically. If you would sit around with some of your worship ministry leaders, your band, your choir, you've got a worship council or something, and say, who is in our congregation that we believe should be acknowledged and represented from a worship leadership standpoint? From a worship leadership standpoint. And this was a sheet that happened around my table of my worship staff. And what we did with this is we said, these are the things we feel like it's important to have represented. The reading of scripture, age groups, different kind. You see all the things there, list dancers, prayer, those kind of things. And then what we did was at our worship planning sessions every quarter, we would bring this sheet back and say, okay, let's check off the things we did in the last month or quarter. And we check down the left side, and there would always be some blanks, right? We didn't do it all. So that would then encourage us to say, okay, we need to prioritize. If we believe in these things, then we need to make sure those things are represented in the next quarter. And it didn't have to be a law for us, but it was a great accountability. We around the table said, these are the things that need to be seen in terms of our worship leadership, to form our people, to use our people. And your list, every church will be different. But that's the beauty of church. Every church is different. But I would just like to challenge you, make sure for one thing, that all your age groups in your congregation are represented in your worship leadership. There is a 70-year-old who can do a great job of reading scripture. There is a child who can do a great job of praying. And frankly, the larger church that you're in, the more a church seems to be segmented. We shuttle the youth off. We shuttle, we bring the kids in to be cute, but not to lead worship. And there's a huge difference. We had a problem with this with some of our kids. I finally wrote a letter to all the parents and said, you may not bring those cameras down to the front row again. Because what happened, the kids were up there, all the parents down the front row, and doing this, and the kids waving, the camera, and so forth. No, that's not what we're here for, parents. And I had to arm wrestle with a few, but I was going to win that battle because they did not want to form those kids to think when they came to church it was to be on camera. Right? So be careful how you do, but use those people, but use them well. Use them well. Use them as worship leaders, not as PQers. So, I'm down to the last one, and then I want to have a few minutes for question and answer. And I don't want to say a lot about this because it's you'll probably get this a lot in other places in this conference about musical skill. But I did put one statement down here to have you think about. What musical skill should you work on? So you go through these six things and you say, wow, one of them is still, I gotta be a good musician. Remember, it all started out by saying, it used to be that you just be a good musician, you were adequately prepared. And they're saying, no, that's not the case. But to be a good musician is still an important factor to adequately prepare worship leaders in the 21st century. Now, I have a student who is a great singer and great guitar player. I said to him, you need to learn to play the keyboard. And he, and he graduated, got an MDiv in worship theology arts, got a great full-time church position. And on Good Friday this year, I got a text from him and said, Ed, I'm leading Good Friday service from the keyboard. And I was so proud of him, it's just, but what is that musical skill? Now, I would say to you, if you're older, there are some technological skills that you probably should take on. One of them I took on was, I'm now a 75% finale notation person. I do all my orchestrations things on a computer. Well, I wasn't trained that way, but boy, if you're going to function, in the church I ended up in, we had six finale workstations just in our worship ministry because we were using that all the time. I had a guy in my orchestra who was starting to have eyesight problems, a bass clarinet player, and every week, one of us on the staff were putting his orchestra parts in a computer so we could blow them up so he could still participate. And I have to tell you, that was one of the most rich, pastoral, rewarding moments of my life. I performed his memorial service when he died and told that story. And we served him with technology. And there's so many ways from a skill standpoint that we can look. I'll tell you one of the things I regret personally, Bruce is going to kill me. I wish I'd 15 years ago started playing guitar. Bruce is a great guitar player, by the way. So I wish I'd taken that up. Some of you may be a good singer and you can't play keyboard. I'm a keyboard singer person by background and training, a theory comp person. But I wish I'd taken up a guitar because I think I've lost some things in terms of my own ability to lead people. I can't talk to a band as well as I could if I was a guitar player or a drummer. Actually, what I really like to do is be a bass player. I may still do that. But I think that's a challenge for all of us in the 21st century. And if you're a guitar player, singer, and that's what a lot of you who are younger in this room is what you are, can you stand in front of a choir and get them through a piece? That's a musical skill you should work on. I had another story, one of my interns, who I said needed to get away from being behind the keyboard. He was so attached to it. And he rebelled. He actually quit his internship over arm wrestling with me over that. A couple years later, he came back and apologized. He said, I got a job at a church, and one of the things in the job description is to conduct this little choir on a monthly basis. I don't know what I'm doing, you know. And he had a great opportunity to learn. So whatever your musical skill is, you assess that and say, what is it that I'm not so strong on? And say, I need to try that, I need to try that, I need to try that. Now, I view these as 6 things. You know how those little VU meters are on a soundboard, they kind of bounce up and down? I see these 6 things as sort of 6 little meters. And you probably right now, I would encourage you, say, which one of these am I really skilled in? Which one of these is really who I am right now? I'm a great musician, but all that pastoral thing, you know? Or I'm a really good people person with people. And by the way, I think sometimes people are, you know, people who are sometimes really good with people are so good with people that they can't demand some quality out of them. You know what I mean? And sometimes people who are so demanding musically are viewed as angry, non-pastoral, and maybe they are. Maybe they are. But so figure out where your strengths are of these 6 and say, that's who I am, that's my strength. But then look at what's the 1 or 2 that you say, I'm not so good on that one. I need to find some way to kind of make that meter bounce up a little higher. That little vision for you, how can I bounce this up a little higher? Now, I would say don't go on a big guilt trip that you've got to be at a 10 level on all 6 things. I don't think God expects that of us. However, I do think God asks us to improve. And he asks us to surround ourselves with people who are not like we are. The first thing I do in the worship leadership class for fall is I give them a personality profile. First week. And I wish when I was there, somebody done that for me, to know who I am. Because I don't think we know who we are sometimes. But I help them identify. So week 2, we plot them all on the board. You know, here's the leader, here's the fun person, here's the introvert, here's, you know, here's the person who needs details, here's the person who doesn't. You know, it's fascinating to see. They all. So then I say, you know, you should work with you, and you should work with you. If you're honest, how many of you are married? And you admit it. Okay. Good. Is this being recorded?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. But you know what happens is, I think we marry opposites, don't we? We marry opposites. The person who's really emotional marries somebody who's kind of nice and level, you know. And that, but you know, so we're worship leaders. If we pick everything based on what we're like, we're gonna miss the language of somebody else who's out there in our congregation who's the opposite. So we need to surround ourselves with people who will say, Ed, you know, you started the last 4 weeks with a stand and jump and clap song. You know, there's some people here who need to just come in and be silent. Really? That's not what I'm like. Yeah, but those people are like that. And what am I doing at that point? If I listen to that person, I'm being pastoral, I'm being formational, I'm being creative. You see where this all can kind of overlap with each other? But we need those other kinds of people to balance out who we're not. But that doesn't excuse us from trying to be better at something. Okay. So I've talked fast and blast through things. We've got 6 minutes. Who has a question or a comment?
I have a question. So what are your thoughts then on hiring professional musicians from outside of the church? Not all churches have that luxury of having just great musicians.
Yeah, no, I
in their
understand.
congregation.
I understand. And I've answered this question a million times. And I'll tell you, in principle, I'm against it. Now, that doesn't mean I've never done it. But 90% of me is against it. Why? Because I do believe in my heart that God will bring to a community the people who should lead and be a part of that community. Now, that makes it tough sometimes. It makes it tough a lot. But that's why I like this creative elements sheet that I gave you, because sometimes you haven't thought completely about who's in your community. And maybe your community should function without a drummer, but it should have a dancer. You know, and find ways to creatively do your worship with who's in your community. Now, I understand the limitations of that, and I would say, you know, that's why I said 90% of me feels that way. Because sometimes, you know, but I do, what I object to, I'll tell you what I object to, is what I call the gig mentality. That people are doing this. I don't see how people can lead people into God's presence who haven't been there. I just don't see that. And I want people who understand their role And, you know, and if somebody just come in and do it, by the way, I don't understand people who don't have a rehearsal. I see bands that come in an hour before the service, and you know, they're not gonna be creative, they're not gonna be a community, they're gonna get the job done, you know, I gotta get through this chart. You know, you need a rehearsal, you really do, or you're not gonna fulfill, you know, a lot of this, you just won't. There'll be no formation, you can see how that goes. Any other question or comment?
Do you have any suggestions on pastoring your musicians?
Pastoring musicians?
Yeah, pastoring your worship teams.
Well, yes, I do. Well, this is another. You know, I don't think it's complicated. And I think sometimes, because I think sometimes we're looking for that discipleship manual for musicians that you should write, you know. But I think it's simpler than that. I think it's living life with the people who serve with you. You know, I view this as, we are all leaders. I view this as sort of like we're like a manager of a baseball team, and we've got coaches. And our band, our choir, these are the coaches. These are the people who serve us. And I think these people should be our priority in terms of, if I'm gonna buy somebody a lunch, I'm gonna buy these people lunch before I'll buy these people lunch. But I want these people then to be pastors to somebody else, you know, and somebody else. I also think one little practical thing on this, and I'm not doing a good job answering your question, but we can have lunch and talk more. But I always thought it was my responsibility as leader, before rehearsal, to have everything of mine in place. If it was a band rehearsal, to have all the music out for me, I'm ready. And I'm there a half hour early. Why? Because I want to be free and available to help somebody carry their amp in. I want to be able to get down to the floor and plug it in, carry a music stand that's in the wrong place. Why? Because there were conversations that happened with people. It was me having conversations with the guitar player that I wouldn't have any other way. And I can't tell you how many times, you know, this guy he's really having a hard time being there tonight because of work, family, something. So sometimes our prayer was before rehearsal started, just me and the guitar player and the drummer. And I think that's one of the, you pastor by living life with them. I had a guy who was a very successful medical doctor, and he came to church nominally Christian, and because his kids were in a Christian school, he wanted to get them in church, so forth. And turns out he was a world-class saxophone player. And he came up and said, "Would there ever be a place for a sax in worship?" I said, "Well, let's have lunch." Now, I wasn't going to say yes or no on the spot, but I wanted to get to know who this person was. Well, that led to a very good friendship. It led to a place where I ended up leading his father to the Lord when he was dying in the hospital. It meant he gave me a call once at night, said, "Can you come over to the house? My daughter is threatening to run away from home." I ended up performing a wedding for that daughter later. You know, but those are all because I had lunch. I had a line item in my budget for meals, and it was to do exactly that kind of a thing. That kind of a thing. Prioritize the people. That guy ended up leading a handbell choir as well as playing sax and singing in choir. It just was, he got his faith really worked out before we put him to big work, you know. But all started over, would there ever be a place for a sax, and let's have lunch. And so I think that's my
Sounds like a
best.
book title right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I left the church, I took him to lunch, and about halfway through the meal, I told him I was leaving. And you know, it was a heartbreaking moment for both of us. Really. Neither one of us finished our lunch. I paid for it. But you know, those are the relational kinds of things. Any other quick question, comment? I flew through this, and I hope there's something in there that's both helpful and convicting. You'll go do something different. Don't just run in place because we spent this hour together, right? Be someplace different. God bless you. If I can do anything to help you, I have some cards. I'll put a few business cards here if you ever want to contact me. Please come and take some of these CDs and cards as resources for 5 solos. Be glad to help in that way.